I'm Jessica Thompson, and at 25 years old, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was wrong. When I woke up in Riverside General Medical Center with a shattered pelvis and internal bleeding from a horrific car accident, gasping into my phone, "Please come, I'm scared and alone," my brother Michael's response was ice cold. "Not my problem, Jess. You made your bed." What he didn't know was that my hospital room had become ground zero for a truth so devastating it would expose 25 years of lies, manipulation, and a family secret that would change everything forever. Sometimes it takes lying broken in a hospital bed to finally see clearly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in our Mediterranean-style home on Cypress Lane in the Magnolia Heights neighborhood of Riverside, California, we appeared to be the picture of middle-class success. Our house, with its terracotta roof tiles and perfectly manicured front lawn, sat prominently on the corner lot where neighbors would wave cheerfully during their evening walks. My father, Robert Thompson, had built a respectable career as regional sales manager at Thompson Auto Parts, a business his own father had started in the 1960s. My mother, Linda, was one of the top real estate agents at Premier Properties, known throughout Riverside for her sharp business sense and impeccable style. To anyone looking from the outside, the Thompsons had achieved the American dream. Our family dynamic seemed straightforward enough. Michael, 3 years older than me, had always been the golden child, star quarterback in high school, computer science degree from UC San Diego, and now a successful software engineer at a trendy startup in the Gaslamp Quarter. He lived in a sleek downtown loft, drove a Tesla, and dated models and marketing executives. Meanwhile, I had taken a different path. After studying communications at Cal State Fullerton, I'd landed a position at Pacific Coast Marketing Agency in Riverside, choosing to stay close to home rather than chase big city dreams. While Michael's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and bragging rights at the country club, my quieter successes seemed to blend into the background. The first crack in our family facade appeared when I was 12 years old. I had saved my allowance for months to buy a professional art set, dreaming of becoming an illustrator. I spent weeks working on a portrait of our family dog, Max, pouring my heart into every detail. When I proudly displayed it on the refrigerator, Michael glanced at it dismissively and said, "Pretty good for a kid, I guess." But it was my parents' reaction that cut deeper. My mother barely looked up from her phone, murmuring, "That's nice, honey," while my father continued reading his newspaper. Later that evening, I overheard them talking about Michael's latest programming project with genuine excitement and pride. The contrast was unmistakable, though I couldn't articulate why it hurt so much at the time. As we grew older, this pattern became more pronounced. Michael's accomplishments were family celebrations requiring elaborate dinners, photo sessions, and detailed recounting to relatives and friends. When he graduated summa cum laude from UC San Diego, my parents threw a massive backyard party, inviting half the neighborhood. When I graduated with honors from Cal State Fullerton, we went to dinner at Olive Garden. Michael's job offers were discussed endlessly at family gatherings, while my career milestones were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. I began to understand that in the Thompson family hierarchy, I occupied a distinctly secondary position. The emotional distance grew more apparent during family gatherings. Michael would regale everyone with stories from his glamorous San Diego lifestyle, while I found myself listening from the sidelines. When relatives asked about my life, my parents would quickly redirect conversations back to Michael's latest achievements or romantic adventures. During Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings, I felt increasingly like a supporting character in The Michael Thompson Show. Yet I continued to show up hoping that somehow my presence mattered, that my family valued me beyond my role as an appreciative audience for my brother's success. My relationship with Michael himself was complicated by years of subtle competitiveness and dismissal. He had mastered the art of backhanded compliments and casual put-downs that left me questioning myself. "Good for you for being satisfied with a small-town job," he'd say when I mentioned work achievements. "Not everyone needs to be ambitious." When I started dating David Park, a graphic designer at a local studio, Michael's comment was, "At least you're realistic about your options." These interactions left me feeling diminished, but when I mentioned feeling hurt, my parents would brush off my concerns with, "That's just how brothers are," or "Michael doesn't mean anything by it."
The pattern extended beyond emotional neglect into practical matters. When my car broke down during my senior year in college, I called home asking for help with the repair costs. My parents hemmed and hawed about the expense, eventually offering a small loan that I would need to pay back promptly. 6 months later, when Michael wanted to upgrade his already expensive car, they simply wrote him a check without question. When I needed help moving into my first apartment after graduation, I spent the day with hired movers while Michael got family assistance moving into his luxury loft. The message was clear. Resources, both emotional and financial, flowed primarily in one direction. Despite these patterns, I maintained hope that family loyalty would prevail when it truly mattered. I told myself that when faced with real crisis, the superficial favoritism would fade and genuine care would emerge. I convinced myself that my parents' love was simply expressed differently, that Michael's dismissiveness was just sibling rivalry that would mature into mutual respect. I believed that underneath the everyday dynamics lay a foundation of family commitment that would surface during times of genuine need. This belief would soon be tested in the most devastating way possible. My job at Pacific Coast Marketing Agency had become a source of genuine fulfillment and professional growth. I'd started as a junior account coordinator, but had quickly proven myself capable of handling larger clients and more complex campaigns. My supervisor, Maria Santos, had become both a mentor and advocate, encouraging me to pursue advanced certifications and take on leadership roles within the agency. For the first time in my life, I was experiencing recognition based purely on merit, and the validation felt intoxicating.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
After years of feeling overlooked at home, the evening of November 15th started like any other workday. I'd stayed late to finish a presentation for a major client meeting scheduled for the following morning. The campaign we'd developed for a regional restaurant chain represented months of work and could potentially lead to the biggest account of my career. I was excited, nervous, and deeply invested in the outcome. As I finally packed up my desk around 8:30, I called my parents to share my enthusiasm about the next day's presentation. My mother listened politely but seemed distracted, mentioning that Michael had just gotten another promotion and was considering a move to Seattle for an even better opportunity. The drive home along Highway 91 was routine until it wasn't. I was traveling in the right lane, maintaining a safe speed and following distance, when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Highway 91 and Magnolia Avenue. The impact was devastating. His pickup truck slammed into the driver's side of my Honda Civic with such force that my car spun twice before colliding with a concrete barrier. The next few minutes were a blur of shattered glass, twisted metal, and searing pain that seemed to encompass my entire body. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but extracting me from the wreckage took nearly an hour. The jaws of life were required to peel back the mangled metal that had pinned my legs, and I drifted in and out of consciousness during the extraction process. The paramedics worked efficiently, stabilizing my condition enough for transport while discussing my injuries in medical terminology that sounded ominous even through my haze of pain and shock. I remembered the urgent radio communications, the steady beeping of monitoring equipment, and the concerned faces of the medical team as they prepared me for emergency transport to Riverside General Medical Center. The ambulance ride was a nightmare of sirens, urgent medical interventions, and escalating pain that even heavy medications couldn't fully suppress. I was conscious enough to understand that my injuries were serious, potentially life-threatening, and that I was facing the most frightening experience of my life completely alone. The paramedic holding my hand kept reassuring me that we were almost at the hospital, that the trauma team was ready, and that I was going to be okay. But his concerned expression contradicted his optimistic words. As we pulled into the emergency bay, I could see the trauma team assembling, their serious faces and urgent movements confirming my worst fears about the severity of my condition. The emergency room became a whirlwind of medical activity, diagnostic tests, and urgent consultations between doctors who spoke in rapid clinical terms about internal bleeding, potential organ damage, and the need for immediate surgical intervention.
Dr. Patricia Wells, the trauma surgeon, explained that I had sustained a shattered pelvis, internal bleeding, and possible spinal complications that would require extensive surgical repair and a long recovery process. The pain was overwhelming despite the medications, and the fear of permanent disability added psychological trauma to my physical injuries. It was during those first terrifying hours in the ER that I made the phone calls that would forever change my understanding of the family dynamics. My first call was to my parents. Through tears and medication-induced confusion, I explained that I'd been in a serious car accident and was in the emergency room at Riverside General. "Please come," I begged, my voice breaking with fear and pain. "I'm scared and alone, and they're saying I might need multiple surgeries." My mother's response was a mix of concern and inconvenience. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," she said, but her tone suggested more annoyance than genuine alarm. "Your father and I are at the Hendersons' anniversary party at the country club. Can we come by tomorrow morning instead? I'm sure the doctors will take good care of you tonight." The casual dismissal of my desperate plea for support felt like a physical blow on top of my existing injuries. My second call was to Michael, hoping that sibling bonds might prove stronger than the everyday dynamics that had defined our relationship. "Michael," I sobbed into the phone, "I've been in a horrible car accident. I'm in the hospital and I'm really scared. Can you please come? I need family here with me." His response was even more devastating than my parents' casual dismissal. "Not my problem, Jess," he said with chilling indifference. "You made your bed by choosing to stay in that boring town instead of making something of yourself. I'm not driving 2 hours because you had a fender bender." When I tried to explain the severity of my injuries, he cut me off. "Look, I'm sure you're being dramatic, like always. Call mom and dad if you need someone to hold your hand." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the steady beep of hospital monitors and the crushing realization that my family's indifference ran deeper than I had ever imagined. The third call I made was to my best friend, Amanda Rivera, who lived about 20 minutes away in Corona. Amanda's reaction was everything my family's wasn't. Immediate alarm, genuine concern, and without hesitation, she said she was on her way. "Don't worry about anything," she said firmly. "I'm grabbing my keys right now and I'll be there in 15 minutes. You're not alone, Jess. I'm coming." True to her word, Amanda arrived quickly, bringing comfort items from my apartment, staying through the night, and providing the emotional support that should have come from family. Her presence highlighted the stark contrast between chosen family and biological family, between people who show up when it matters and those who prioritize their own convenience above genuine crisis. As I lay in that hospital bed through the long, painful night, processing both my physical trauma and the emotional devastation of my family's abandonment, I couldn't have imagined that this moment of complete vulnerability would become the catalyst for discovering a truth so shocking that it would reframe my entire understanding of the Thompson family dynamics. The accident had stripped away all pretenses and revealed the true priorities of the people I'd spent my life trying to please and understand. But what I would learn in the coming days would prove that their indifference wasn't just about favoritism or personality differences. It was rooted in a secret that had shaped every interaction, every dismissal, and every moment of feeling like an outsider in my own family. The first surgery took place the morning after the accident, a grueling 6-hour procedure to repair my shattered pelvis and address the internal bleeding that had kept the medical team on high alert throughout the night. Dr. Wells emerged from the operating room exhausted, but cautiously optimistic,
explaining to Amanda that while the surgery had gone well, my recovery would be lengthy and challenging. Amanda had appointed herself my advocate and emergency contact, a role she embraced with fierce dedication while my actual family remained conspicuously absent. She took detailed notes during medical consultations, asked questions I was too drugged and disoriented to formulate, and maintained a steady presence that provided the stability I desperately needed during those first critical days. Michael's absence became more glaring as the hours stretched into days. Amanda had left several voicemails updating him on my condition, the successful surgery, and my ongoing medical needs. His responses were curt text messages that revealed both his continued indifference and a disturbing pattern of minimizing my situation. "Glad the drama is over," read one message. "Let me know when she's back to normal," said another. These dismissive communications stood in stark contrast to the concerned calls and visits from my coworkers, neighbors, and college friends who had heard about the accident through Amanda's updates on social media. People I barely knew from the marketing agency sent flowers and cards, while my own brother treated my hospitalization like an inconvenience he hoped would resolve quickly. My parents finally appeared on the third day after the accident, arriving during visiting hours with an air of obligation rather than genuine concern. My mother carried a small arrangement of grocery store flowers and immediately began commenting on the hospital room's sterile atmosphere and uncomfortable visitor chairs. My father seemed more interested in discussing my car insurance coverage and the logistics of dealing with the totaled vehicle than inquiring about my pain levels or emotional state. Their visit felt performative, as if they were checking a box marked dutiful parents rather than responding to their daughter's medical crisis with authentic care and support. During their brief visit, I attempted to explain the severity of my injuries and the long rehabilitation process that lay ahead. Dr. Wells had outlined a recovery timeline that included weeks of bed rest, months of physical therapy, and the possibility of additional surgeries depending on how my bones healed. The financial implications were staggering, even with my health insurance, and I was facing the prospect of extended time away from work during a crucial period in my career development. When I mentioned these concerns to my parents, hoping for emotional support, if not practical assistance, their response was tepid sympathy, followed by suggestions that I contact my insurance company and perhaps look into short-term disability benefits through my employer. The contrast between their visit and Amanda's daily presence was stark and painful. Amanda had essentially moved into my hospital room, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner, coordinating with my supervisor at work to manage my current projects, and researching rehabilitation facilities and home care options for my eventual discharge. She had created a support network that included my coworkers, college friends, and even David, who had been traveling for work when the accident occurred but rushed back as soon as Amanda reached him. This chosen family rallied around me with practical help, emotional support, and unwavering presence, while my biological family maintained their distance and detachment. The turning point in my understanding of family dynamics came during a conversation with my hospital roommate, Mrs. Eleanor Chen, an elderly woman recovering from hip replacement surgery. Mrs. Chen had been observing the flow of visitors to our shared room and commented on the obvious love and dedication shown by my friends. "You're very lucky to have such devoted people in your life," she said warmly. "That young woman who sleeps here every night must be your sister. You can see the family resemblance in how much she cares for you." When I explained that Amanda was my best friend, while my actual brother lived 2 hours away and hadn't visited, Mrs. Chen's expression shifted to concern and confusion. "In my family," she said gently, "distance means nothing when someone needs help. We would travel across the world if necessary." Mrs. Chen's observation forced me to confront the reality that my family's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable by most standards of human decency. Her own family demonstrated this daily, with children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren rotating through constant visits, bringing homemade food, handling her affairs at home, and ensuring she never felt alone or abandoned during her recovery. The elderly woman's casual assumption that Amanda must be my sister because of her devotion highlighted how obviously absent my actual family support appeared to outside observers. This external perspective helped me recognize that I had been making excuses for unacceptable behavior for most of my life. The conversation with Mrs. Chen also revealed patterns I had never fully acknowledged. She spoke about family gatherings where every member was valued, where achievements were celebrated equally, and where crisis brought immediate mobilization of support. Her stories of grandchildren calling daily, adult children coordinating care schedules, and extended family contributing whatever assistance was needed painted a picture of functional family dynamics that seemed foreign to my experience.
I began to realize that the Thompson family's approach to relationships was not just different, but fundamentally dysfunctional in ways I had never allowed myself to recognize. Amanda witnessed my growing awareness of these dysfunctional patterns and gently encouraged me to explore the implications. Jess, I need to tell you something that might be hard to hear. The way your family treats you isn't normal. It's not okay, and it's not your fault. She had been holding back her observations for years, not wanting to create conflict or hurt my feelings, but seeing me broken and abandoned in a hospital bed had finally compelled her to speak truthfully. Her words opened a floodgate of memories and realizations about incidents I had rationalized or dismissed throughout my childhood and young adulthood. Amanda helped me examine specific examples of family favoritism and emotional neglect that I had minimized or explained away. The birthday parties where Michael's friends were always included while mine were treated as impositions. The family vacations planned around his schedule and interests with little consideration for my preferences. The college application process where he received extensive support and guidance while I navigated the system largely on my own. The career decisions where his choices were celebrated and supported, while mine were questioned
or dismissed. Pattern after pattern emerged as we talked, revealing a systematic approach to family relationships that positioned me as less important, less deserving, and less valued than my brother. The hospital environment provided an unexpected clarity for processing these realizations. Stripped of normal routines, distractions, and social expectations, I found myself with hours of quiet time to reflect on decades of family interactions through this new lens of understanding. The pain medications created a mental state that was simultaneously hazy and focused, allowing suppressed memories and emotions to surface without my usual psychological defenses. I began to remember incidents from childhood that I had buried or reframed, moments when the disparity in treatment had been obvious even to my young mind, before I learned to rationalize and accept it as normal. One particularly painful memory involved my high school graduation, an event that should have been a celebration of my academic achievements and future potential. I had graduated in the top 10% of my class, earned several academic awards, and received a partial scholarship to Cal State Fullerton. However, the day was overshadowed by constant comparisons to Michael's achievements and future prospects. During the post-graduation dinner, my parents spent most of the evening discussing Michael's internship opportunities and graduate school plans, while my accomplishments were mentioned briefly and then set aside. I remembered feeling invisible at my own graduation celebration, a supporting character in someone else's success story. Another suppressed memory involved a family emergency from my sophomore year of college when our grandfather suffered a heart attack. Michael was immediately excused from his classes and provided with travel funds to fly home, while I was told that missing classes would be irresponsible and that one family member's presence was sufficient. I had wanted desperately to say goodbye to my grandfather, who had always been kind and supportive, but was made to feel selfish for prioritizing personal relationships over academic responsibilities. My grandfather passed away while I was taking midterm exams, and I learned of his death through a brief text message rather than a phone call. The funeral arrangements were made around Michael's schedule, and I attended alone after driving 5 hours immediately after finishing my last exam. These memories, surfacing in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, painted a clear picture of systemic exclusion and diminished importance within my own family structure. The pattern was so consistent and long-standing that I had adapted to it rather than recognizing it as problematic. I had learned to expect less, ask for less, and need less from my family because the alternative was constant disappointment and rejection. The car accident and its aftermath
had simply revealed the extreme end of this spectrum, where even genuine medical emergency and physical vulnerability couldn't overcome their fundamental indifference to my welfare. Amanda's presence during this period of realization was invaluable, providing both emotional support and objective validation for my emerging understanding of these dysfunctional family dynamics. She had witnessed many of these patterns over the years of our friendship, but had hesitated to comment, respecting my need to maintain family relationships despite their obvious limitations. Now seeing me physically broken and emotionally abandoned, she felt compelled to help me recognize that I deserved better treatment and that accepting less was not noble or mature, but self-destructive. The medical team also began to notice the unusual family dynamics surrounding my hospitalization. Dr. Wells commented during one of her rounds that family support was typically crucial for recovery motivation and emotional healing, and she seemed concerned about my isolation. The nursing staff had grown accustomed to Amanda's constant presence and had begun treating her as my primary family contact, automatically providing her with updates and including her in care planning discussions. Their assumption that Amanda was my sister or closest family member because of her obvious dedication and concern highlighted how abnormal my actual family's absence appeared to healthcare professionals who saw family dynamics during medical crises regularly. Social workers at the hospital also took note of my situation, particularly when preparing discharge planning and home care arrangements. The standard protocol involved family members in planning for post-hospital care, transportation, and support during recovery. But my case required alternative arrangements due to my family's unavailability and disinterest. Amanda was exploring the possibility of taking extended leave from her job to help care for me, while my parents had made it clear that their busy schedules and lifestyle commitments made them unavailable for caregiving responsibilities. This practical abandonment during a medical crisis was noted in my hospital records and raised concerns among the staff about my support system and safety upon discharge. The psychological impact of this family abandonment during my medical crisis extended far beyond disappointment or hurt feelings. It represented a fundamental threat to my sense of identity and belonging that required serious mental health intervention. The hospital psychiatrist, Dr. Monica Rivera, was consulted to help me process both the trauma of the accident and the emotional devastation of family rejection during my most vulnerable moment. Our sessions revealed that I had spent years constructing elaborate justifications and explanations for my family's behavior, creating a psychological framework that protected me from acknowledging their fundamental lack of care and concern for my welfare. Dr. Rivera helped me understand that recognizing these dysfunctional patterns was not betrayal or disloyalty, but necessary self-protection and mental health maintenance. She explained that family systems often establish roles and hierarchies that serve the needs of some members while sacrificing others, and that questioning these arrangements was not only acceptable, but psychologically essential for the marginalized family members. Her validation of my emerging awareness provided professional support for what Amanda had been telling me through friendship and love, that I deserved better treatment and that accepting less was damaging my self-worth and life prospects. The days in the hospital became a period of intensive self-examination and family system analysis that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The forced inactivity, pain medication effects, and removal from daily routines created a mental space for processing decades of accumulated experiences through this new lens of understanding.
Lens of understanding. I began to see my entire life history as a series of accommodations to family dysfunction, rather than normal relationship navigation. And this realization was both liberating and terrifying in its implications for my future choices and boundaries. As my physical condition stabilized and discharge planning began, the practical implications of my family's abandonment became increasingly apparent.
I would need assistance with basic daily activities for several weeks, transportation to medical appointments, help managing my household affairs, and emotional support during a challenging recovery process. My parents had made it clear that these needs were inconvenient and disruptive to their established routines, while Michael continued to treat my situation as temporary drama that would resolve itself without his involvement. The contrast between their indifference and Amanda's exhaustive planning and preparation could not have been more stark or painful. The realization that my family's behavior during this crisis was merely an extreme example of lifelong patterns, rather than an aberration, created both clarity and profound sadness. I grieved not only for the family support I wasn't receiving during my medical emergency, but for the decades of diminished treatment I had accepted as normal. The accident had stripped away my psychological defenses and revealed the truth about my position within the Thompson family structure. I was tolerated rather than treasured, included rather than embraced, and expected to be grateful for the minimal consideration I received rather than demanding the love and support that should have been freely given. Amanda's unwavering presence and the kindness of hospital staff, coworkers, and friends created a stark contrast that illuminated the poverty of my family relationships. These people, who owed me nothing beyond basic human decency, had provided more practical help, emotional support, and genuine care during my crisis than the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. This realization was both heartbreaking and empowering, showing me what healthy relationships looked like, while confirming that my family's treatment of me was neither normal nor acceptable. The question that emerged from this period of realization was not whether my family's behavior was problematic, that had become undeniably clear, but what I was going to do with this knowledge moving forward. The accident had created a natural breaking point in our family dynamics, a moment when their true priorities and my actual value in their lives had been revealed beyond any possibility of denial or rationalization. How I responded to this revelation would determine not only my future relationship with the Thompson family, but my ability to build the kind of life and relationships I actually deserved, rather than settling for what I had always accepted as sufficient. The discharge planning meeting brought all the contradictions in my family situation into sharp focus. Dr. Wells, Amanda, a social worker named Mrs. Blake, and I gathered in a small conference room to discuss my transition home and ongoing care needs. The absence of my parents and Michael from this crucial planning session spoke volumes about their priorities and level of investment in my recovery. Mrs. Blake had specifically requested that family members attend to coordinate care responsibilities, but when contacted, my parents cited work obligations and Michael claimed his presence wasn't necessary since everything seemed under control. Amanda had taken time off from her position at an accounting firm to serve as my primary caregiver during the initial recovery phase. She had researched rehabilitation requirements, coordinated with my insurance company, arranged for medical equipment delivery to my apartment, and scheduled follow-up appointments with various specialists. Her dedication was remarkable, considering she had no obligation beyond friendship, while my actual family members treated these essential arrangements as burdens they preferred to avoid. The social worker's notes reflected this unusual dynamic, documenting that traditional family support structures were absent and that alternative arrangements had been necessary to ensure safe discharge. Dr. Wells explained that my recovery would involve multiple phases, beginning with several weeks of limited mobility and progressing through extensive physical therapy over the following months. The fractured pelvis required careful healing to prevent long-term complications, and my internal injuries needed monitoring for potential complications. Pain management would be ongoing, and I would need assistance with basic activities like cooking, cleaning, and transportation for at least 6 weeks. These requirements represented a significant commitment from caregivers, something Amanda embraced willingly, while my family continued to maintain their distance. The conversation about pain medication became particularly revealing about family attitudes toward my medical needs. Dr. Wells prescribed a carefully monitored regimen of pain relievers that would help manage the severe discomfort while minimizing addiction risks. When I mentioned these medications to my mother during one of her brief phone calls,
Her immediate concern was whether I might become dependent on drugs rather than whether I was managing the pain effectively. Her questions focused on the potential embarrassment of having a daughter with prescription drug problems rather than my comfort and healing process. This response perfectly encapsulated her consistent prioritization of appearances and reputation over my actual welfare. Michael's reaction to my medication needs was even more dismissive and judgmental. During one of his rare text message exchanges, he made several comments about people who become pill addicts after minor injuries and suggested that I was probably exaggerating my pain levels to get attention and sympathy. His implication that my medically documented injuries and professionally prescribed treatment plan were somehow fabricated or excessive revealed both his fundamental lack of empathy and his commitment to minimizing my experience regardless of objective evidence. These attitudes made it clear that seeking support from my family during recovery would likely result in additional stress rather than comfort. The practical arrangements for my return home highlighted the stark difference between chosen and biological family support systems. Amanda had coordinated with David to install safety equipment in my bathroom, rearrange furniture to accommodate my mobility limitations, and stock my apartment with groceries and prepared meals for the first week. My coworkers at Pacific Coast Marketing had organized a meal delivery schedule and offered to handle any work-related tasks that might arise during my absence. My parents had visited
Apartment once to assess what they termed the situation, but had left after 20 minutes without offering concrete assistance or making any specific commitments to help with my care. The transition from hospital to home recovery was emotionally challenging as well as physically demanding. The familiar environment of my apartment, which had always represented independence and personal achievement, now felt like a prison where I was dependent on others for basic functions. Simple tasks like showering required assistance. Preparing meals was impossible, and getting dressed became a lengthy, painful process that exhausted me completely. Amanda's patience and gentle care during these vulnerable moments stood in sharp contrast to my family's complete absence from these intimate aspects of recovery and healing. The first week at home also revealed how completely my family had written off my medical crisis as concluded once I was discharged from the hospital. My mother called twice to check on my progress, but both conversations focused more on when I would return to normal activities than on my current pain levels or emotional state. My father didn't call at all, apparently considering my discharge as the end of any family obligation to monitor my welfare. Michael sent a single text message asking if I was back to work yet, just 4 days after my release, demonstrating his complete ignorance about the severity of my injuries and recovery timeline. The physical therapy appointments became another source of insight into healthy versus dysfunctional family dynamics. The rehabilitation center was filled with patients recovering from various injuries and surgeries, most accompanied by dedicated family members who took notes during sessions, encouraged progress, and provided transportation and emotional support. Amanda attended every appointment with me, learning techniques to help with home exercises and advocating for additional services when my progress seemed slower than expected. Other patients and their families assumed she was my sister or daughter, and the staff automatically included her in treatment planning discussions because her involvement and investment were so obvious. One particularly memorable interaction occurred during a group session where family members discussed their experiences supporting loved ones through rehabilitation. A woman whose husband was recovering from a motorcycle accident described how their entire extended family had reorganized their schedules to ensure continuous support and care. She mentioned siblings taking turns providing transportation, parents preparing special meals to encourage healing, and cousins handling household tasks to reduce stress on the recovering family member. Her description of this comprehensive family mobilization, highlighting how abnormal my own family's response had been and how isolated my recovery experience was in comparison to healthy family functioning. The financial implications of my accident and recovery created additional stress that my family seemed determined to ignore completely. While my health insurance covered most medical expenses, there were significant costs for rehabilitation services, medical equipment,
prescription medications, and lost income during my extended absence from work. Amanda had helped me apply for short-term disability benefits and explore options for financial assistance, but the burden was still substantial for someone in my income bracket. When I mentioned these financial pressures to my parents, hoping for emotional support if not direct assistance, their response was suggestions to contact my insurance company and perhaps look into payment plans with medical providers. The contrast between my family's financial indifference and their treatment of Michael's expenses was particularly galling. During my recovery period, I learned through my mother's casual conversation that they had recently given Michael a substantial sum to help with a down payment on a new condo in San Diego. This gift was presented as normal parental assistance for a successful adult child pursuing home ownership, while my medical expenses were treated as personal problems I needed to solve independently. The disparity in financial support based on perceived worthiness and importance could not have been more obvious or painful. Amanda's observations about my family dynamics became more direct as she witnessed their absence and indifference firsthand. Having known me for several years, she had always sensed that my family relationships were problematic, but seeing their behavior during a genuine medical crisis removed any ambiguity about their priorities and values. She began asking pointed questions about my childhood experiences and family history that helped me recognize patterns I had normalized or suppressed. Her outside perspective, combined with the clarity that came from extended recovery time, created space for honest examination of decades of dysfunctional family interactions. One evening during my third week at home, Amanda sat with me on my couch and gently but firmly confronted me about the reality of my family situation. "Jess," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something important. What's happening now with your family isn't an exception or an unusual response to crisis. It's exactly consistent with how they've always treated you, just more obvious because the stakes are higher." She had been documenting their absence, noting their excuses, and observing their priorities throughout my hospitalization and recovery. Her systematic analysis of their behavior removed any possibility of explaining away their indifference as temporary stress or unfortunate timing. Amanda helped me trace the connections between my current abandonment and lifelong patterns of emotional neglect and systematic devaluation. The family that couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital was the same family that had consistently minimized my achievements, dismissed my concerns, and prioritized Michael's needs over mine throughout our lives. The parents who found my medical crisis inconvenient were the same parents who had treated my emotions as less important, my goals as less worthy, and my presence as less valuable than my brother's.
And settle for minimal consideration rather than demanding the respect and care I deserved. This psychological adaptation had protected me from constant disappointment, but had also normalized unacceptable treatment and prevented me from recognizing how dysfunctional my family relationships actually were. The isolation of recovery also provided time to examine my romantic relationships and friendships through this new lens of understanding family dysfunction. I realized that I had often accepted less than ideal treatment from friends and dating partners because it still felt better than what I experienced at home. My standards for relationship quality had been distorted by years of emotional neglect and systematic devaluation, making me grateful for basic kindness and consideration that should have been minimum expectations. This recognition was both disturbing and empowering, suggesting that healing my family relationships might improve all my other relationships as well. Physical therapy sessions became opportunities for observing healthy family interactions and support systems in action. I watched adult children patiently encouraging elderly parents through difficult exercises, spouses advocating fiercely for their partner's care needs, and siblings coordinating schedules to ensure continuous support throughout recovery processes. These demonstrations of family love and commitment highlighted how different my experience was and how much I had been missing throughout my life. The therapists themselves noticed the unusual absence of family support in my case and occasionally asked gentle questions about my support system that reflected their professional concern about my isolated recovery process. The most painful realization during this period was understanding that my family's indifference wasn't due to personality differences, busy schedules, or temporary stress, but reflected their fundamental assessment of my worth and importance in their lives. The medical crisis had simply revealed what had always been true, that I occupied a secondary position in the Thompson family hierarchy, and that my needs would always be subordinated to the convenience and preferences of other family members. This recognition was devastating, but also liberating, removing the burden of trying to earn love and consideration that would never be freely given, regardless of my efforts or achievements. Amanda's presence during this period of realization provided both emotional support and practical assistance that allowed me to process these painful truths without becoming overwhelmed by isolation and despair. She served as a witness to my family's behavior, validating my perceptions and helping me distinguish between normal family conflict and systematic dysfunction. Her consistent care and advocacy demonstrated what healthy relationships looked like and provided a model for the kind of treatment I should expect and demand from people who claim to care about me. This contrast was essential for developing new standards and boundaries that would protect me from accepting inadequate treatment in the future. The slow process of physical healing paralleled an equally important process of emotional and psychological healing that required honest examination of my family relationships and their impact on my self-worth and life choices. The accident had created a natural breaking point where continuing to rationalize and accept dysfunctional family dynamics was no longer possible or psychologically safe. The question was no longer whether my family's treatment of me was problematic, but what I was going to do with this knowledge and how I would protect myself from further emotional damage while building the kind of life and relationships I actually deserved. The breakthrough moment came during my 5th week of recovery, when Amanda discovered something that would shatter every assumption I had ever made about my place in the Thompson family. She had been helping me organize my apartment and sort through papers that had accumulated during my hospitalization when she noticed an unfamiliar envelope that had been delivered while I was in the hospital. The return address indicated it was from Patterson and Associates, a law firm in downtown Los Angeles that neither of us recognized. Amanda handed me the envelope with curiosity, noting that it appeared to be official correspondence that might relate to the car accident or insurance matters. Inside the envelope was a letter that would change everything I thought I knew about my identity and family history. The correspondence was from an estate attorney named Charles Patterson, informing me that I was a beneficiary in the estate of Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell, a woman whose name meant nothing to me. According to the letter, Mrs. Hartwell had passed away 6 months earlier, and her will specifically mentioned Jessica Thompson of Riverside, California, as her granddaughter and heir to a substantial portion of her estate. The letter requested that I contact the law firm to provide documentation proving my identity and establish my legal claim to the inheritance. My first reaction was confusion and assumption that this was some sort of mistake or scam. I had never heard the name Margaret Hartwell, and both of my grandmothers had died when I was young. My paternal grandmother was Helen Thompson, and my maternal grandmother was Rose Martinez. There was no Margaret Hartwell in any family stories or photographs that I could remember. Amanda suggested we research the name online before dismissing the letter, and what we discovered launched us into an investigation that would uncover decades of lies and deliberate deception. Our internet search revealed that Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell had been a successful businesswoman who owned several commercial properties throughout Southern California. Her obituary, published in the Los Angeles Times, described her as a philanthropist and entrepreneur who had never married but was survived by one granddaughter, Jessica Thompson, of Riverside, California. The obituary included a photograph of an elegant elderly woman with striking features that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. Most shocking was the obituary's mention that Margaret Hartwell had been born Margaret Elizabeth Martinez before establishing her business empire under her adopted surname. The surname Martinez immediately caught my attention because it was my mother's maiden name, though my mother Linda had always claimed that her parents died when she was very young and that she had no living relatives. According to family stories I'd grown up hearing, my mother Linda Martinez had been raised by distant relatives after her parents' deaths and had lost touch with any extended family members over the years. She had always presented herself as essentially
Alone in the world before meeting and marrying my father, with no family connections or support system beyond the Thompson family she married into. Amanda and I spent hours researching Margaret Hartwell online, finding business records, property transactions, and newspaper articles that painted a picture of a highly successful and influential woman who had built a significant fortune through real estate investments and property development. Most intriguingly, we found several articles from the 1980s and 1990s that mentioned her ongoing search for her estranged daughter and granddaughter, whom she had lost contact with due to family conflicts decades earlier. The articles described legal attempts to locate her missing family members and her desire to reconcile before her death. The implications of this discovery were staggering and demanded immediate investigation. If Margaret Hartwell was indeed my grandmother, then my mother had been lying about her family history for my entire life. More disturbing was the possibility that my mother had deliberately prevented contact between Mrs. Hartwell and me, denying me a relationship with a grandmother who had apparently been searching for us for decades. The thought that I might have had a loving grandmother who wanted to know me while I was growing up with a family that consistently made me feel unwanted and unimportant was almost too painful to contemplate. Amanda encouraged me to contact the law firm immediately to learn more about Mrs. Hartwell and the circumstances of the inheritance. Despite my physical limitations and ongoing recovery, we drove to downtown Los Angeles the following week to meet with Charles Patterson and review the estate documents. The law firm's offices were impressive, located in a gleaming high-rise building that reflected the substantial nature of Mrs. Hartwell's estate and the legal complexity involved in settling her affairs. Charles Patterson was a distinguished man in his 60s who had represented Mrs. Hartwell for over 20 years. He explained that Margaret Hartwell had accumulated significant wealth through shrewd real estate investments and had been searching for her lost family members for most of her adult life. According to Patterson, Mrs. Hartwell had hired private investigators multiple times over the years to locate her daughter Linda, who had disappeared following a family conflict in the early 1970s. The search had been complicated by Linda's marriage and name change, which had effectively hidden her location from investigators for decades. Patterson revealed that Mrs. Hartwell had finally located our family just 2 years earlier through modern internet search techniques and social media investigation. She had discovered my mother's real estate career and our family's public presence in the Riverside community, but her attempts to make contact had been rebuffed repeatedly. According to Patterson, Mrs. Hartwell had sent numerous letters to my parents' home address, left voicemail messages, and even hired a private investigator to deliver personal messages requesting contact. All of these attempts had been ignored or explicitly rejected by my parents, who had refused to allow any communication between Mrs. Hartwell and our family. The most devastating revelation was that Mrs. Hartwell had specifically requested contact with me, her granddaughter, and had been told by my parents that I was not interested in meeting her or developing a relationship.
Patterson showed me copies of letters that Mrs. Hartwell had written specifically to me, expressing her love and desire to know me, despite our years of separation. These letters had never been delivered to me, instead being returned to the law firm marked refused by my parents. The elderly woman had died believing that her granddaughter had rejected her attempts at reconciliation, never knowing that I had been kept completely unaware of her existence and her efforts to connect with me. Patterson explained that Mrs. Hartwell had nonetheless decided to include me as a major beneficiary in her will, hoping that even if she couldn't establish a relationship with me during her lifetime, she could at least provide for my future and ensure that I would eventually learn about her love and concern for my welfare. The inheritance included substantial financial assets, several commercial properties, and personal items that she had specifically designated for me, including family photographs, jewelry, and documents that would help me understand our family history, and her decades-long search for connection with her daughter and granddaughter. The estate documents revealed that Mrs. Hartwell had been a remarkable woman who had overcome significant obstacles to build her business empire while never giving up hope of reuniting with her lost family. Her personal letters, which Patterson shared with my permission, painted a picture of a loving grandmother who had followed my achievements from a distance and felt proud of my independence and career success despite being prevented from expressing her support directly. She had apparently researched my college graduation, career progress, and personal milestones through public records and social media, maintaining a connection to my life even though she couldn't participate in it. The financial inheritance was substantial enough to change my life completely, but the emotional impact of learning about Mrs. Hartwell's love and her frustrated attempts to connect with me was far more significant than any monetary consideration. For the first time in my life, I had evidence that someone in my family had valued me, sought me out, and wanted a relationship with me despite obstacles and rejection. The tragedy was that this person had died before I ever knew she existed, robbed of the relationship she had desperately wanted by my parents' deliberate deception and interference. Amanda and I left the law firm that day with copies of Mrs. Hartwell's letters to me, photographs of family members I had never known existed, and documentation of her business success and philanthropic activities. The drive back to Riverside was emotionally overwhelming as I processed the magnitude of my parents' deception and the relationship I had lost through their deliberate interference. The grandmother who had searched for me and loved me from a distance stood in sharp contrast to the family members who had me right there in their daily lives, but consistently treated me as less important and less deserving of care and consideration. The confrontation with my parents was inevitable, but I wanted to be fully prepared with all the facts and documentation before challenging them about their lies and deception. Amanda helped me research more details about Mrs. Hartwell's life and business career, finding newspaper articles, business profiles, and community recognition that painted a picture of an admirable woman who would have been a wonderful role model if I had ever had the opportunity to know her.
Been a positive influence in my life if I had been allowed to know her. We also found evidence of her charitable giving and community involvement that suggested she would have been a source of guidance and support during my educational and career development years. The more I learned about Margaret Hartwell, the angrier I became about the relationship that had been stolen from me through my parents' deliberate interference and deception. This wasn't a case of family conflict or misunderstanding, but systematic prevention of contact between a grandmother and granddaughter who both would have benefited from knowing each other. My parents had prioritized their own resentments and conflicts over my right to know my grandmother and benefit from her love and support. They had allowed me to grow up feeling unloved and unimportant, while deliberately hiding the existence of a family member who would have treasured me. The decision to confront my parents about Margaret Hartwell and their decades of deception required careful planning and emotional preparation. I knew that they would likely continue to lie and manipulate the situation to protect themselves and minimize their responsibility for the damage they had caused. Amanda and Patterson both encouraged me to approach the confrontation with clear documentation and specific questions that would make it difficult for them to deny the facts or deflect responsibility for their actions.
The confrontation took place at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon when I felt physically strong enough to handle the emotional stress and had organized all the relevant documents and evidence. Amanda drove me to the house and waited outside while I went in alone to face my parents with the truth about Margaret Hartwell and their systematic deception. I brought copies of the estate documents, Mrs. Hartwell's letters to me, and evidence of her attempts to contact our family over the years. My parents' reaction to my discovery was a combination of anger, defensiveness, and attempts to justify their deception through claims about protecting me from family drama and complications. My mother initially tried to deny knowing about Mrs. Hartwell's attempts to contact us, but when confronted with specific evidence and dates, she shifted to explaining that her mother had been a difficult person who had caused family problems and heartache. According to my mother's version of events, Margaret Hartwell had been controlling and manipulative, and cutting contact with her had been necessary for our family's peace and stability. My father's response was more direct and revealing about their actual motivations. He explained that they had worked hard to build their life and reputation in Riverside and didn't want complications from Linda's estranged family members who might make demands or create obligations. He seemed particularly concerned about the potential financial expectations that might have come with acknowledging Mrs. Hartwell as family, apparently unaware that she had been wealthy enough to support us rather than burden us financially. His admission that they had prioritized their convenience and social standing over my right to know my grandmother confirmed that their deception had been entirely selfish and calculated. The most painful part of the confrontation was learning that my parents had known about Mrs. Hartwell's wealth and success, but had still chosen to prevent contact because they feared losing control over their family narrative and social positioning. They had allowed me to struggle financially through college, work multiple jobs to support myself, and stress about money throughout my early career while deliberately hiding the existence of a grandmother who would have gladly provided support and assistance. Their choice to maintain this deception, even when it caused me obvious hardship, revealed the depth of their selfishness and indifference to my welfare. When I demanded to know why they had never told me about Mrs. Hartwell's letters and attempts to contact me specifically, my mother's response was that they had decided I was too young to handle family complications and had planned to tell me when I was older. However, when pressed about why they had continued the deception into my 20s, she couldn't provide any convincing explanation beyond claiming that it had become too complicated to explain and that they had hoped Mrs. Hartwell would simply give up her attempts at contact. Their admission that they had actively intercepted and returned letters addressed to me personally was a violation of my privacy and autonomy that went beyond family conflict into deliberate harm. The revelation about Margaret Hartwell provided crucial context for understanding my family's treatment of me throughout my life and their recent abandonment during my medical crisis. If they were capable of lying about my grandmother's existence and preventing a potentially loving relationship for decades, then their indifference to my car accident and recovery needs was entirely consistent with their established pattern of treating me as less important and less deserving of honesty, respect, and consideration than other family members. The inheritance from Margaret Hartwell provided me with financial independence that would allow me to make choices about my relationship with my parents without economic pressure or dependence. More importantly, her letters and the evidence of her love and pride in my achievements provided validation and emotional healing that countered decades of family neglect and devaluation. For the first time in my life, I had concrete evidence that someone in my family believed in me, valued me, and wanted the best for me, even when prevented from expressing that love directly. The decision to limit contact with my parents and Michael following these revelations was both necessary for my emotional health and possible because of the financial security Mrs. Hartwell had provided through her inheritance. I no longer needed to maintain family relationships that consistently damaged my self-worth and emotional well-being in hopes of eventually earning the love and acceptance that had never been freely given. The contrast between Mrs. Hartwell's love expressed through letters I had never received and my immediate family's indifference displayed during my medical crisis made the choice clear and relatively easy, despite the sadness involved in acknowledging these relationships would never become healthy or supportive. Amanda's support throughout this period of discovery and confrontation was invaluable, providing both practical assistance and emotional validation as I processed the implications of learning about Mrs. Hartwell and my parents' decades of deception.
Deception. Her consistent presence and care during my recovery had already demonstrated what healthy relationships looked like, and her encouragement to pursue the inheritance investigation had led to discoveries that fundamentally changed my understanding of my worth and my options for the future. The chosen family relationship with Amanda had proved more reliable and supportive than any of my biological family connections. The legal process of claiming Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance took several months to complete, but Patterson handled most of the complex paperwork and bureaucratic requirements while I focused on physical recovery and emotional healing. The financial aspects of the inheritance were certainly life-changing, providing security and options I had never imagined possible. But the emotional inheritance was even more valuable. Mrs. Hartwell's letters revealed a woman who would have been proud of my independence, supportive of my career choices, and encouraging of my goals and dreams, rather than dismissive or competitive about my achievements. Building a new life based on the foundation Mrs. Hartwell had provided, rather than the dysfunction I had grown up accepting, required significant psychological adjustment and boundary setting. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of Riverside, found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and recovery, and began the process of establishing relationships and activities based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and familial expectation. The inheritance provided freedom to make choices based on what was healthy and fulfilling, rather than what was financially necessary or socially expected. My relationship with David deepened significantly during this period of transformation and healing. He had been traveling when my accident occurred, but had rushed back to support my recovery and had witnessed both my family's abandonment and my subsequent discoveries about Mrs. Hartwell. His consistent presence and understanding throughout these challenges provided a model for the kind of partnership I wanted to build, based on mutual support and genuine care, rather than competition and conditional acceptance. His family's immediate inclusion of me in their gatherings and traditions offered another example of healthy family dynamics that contrasted sharply with my experiences growing up. The process of establishing boundaries with my parents and Michael required ongoing effort and occasional enforcement, but the financial independence Mrs. Hartwell had provided made it possible to maintain these boundaries without economic pressure to accommodate their expectations or demands. They made several attempts to resume normal contact after the initial confrontations about Mrs. Hartwell, apparently hoping that time would allow them to return to previous dynamics without addressing their deception or changing their behavior. However, my new understanding of healthy relationships and my commitment to protecting my emotional well-being made it impossible to return to previous patterns of acceptance and accommodation. 1 year after the car accident that had initially revealed my family's true priorities and limitations, I was living a life that would have been impossible without Mrs. Hartwell's unexpected gift of both financial support and emotional validation. The physical recovery from my injuries was complete, though I occasionally experienced reminders in the form of minor aches and stiffness that served as physical markers of the period when my life had fundamentally changed direction. More importantly, the emotional recovery from decades of family dysfunction had progressed significantly through therapy, healthy relationships, and the security that came from knowing I was genuinely valued and loved by someone who mattered. The relationship I built with Mrs. Hartwell's memory through her letters and family photographs provided a sense of family connection that was based on love and pride rather than obligation and disappointment. Her business success and community involvement offered a model for achievement and contribution that was inspiring rather than threatening.
and her decades-long search for connection with me provided evidence of the kind of family loyalty and commitment I had always craved but never experienced. Though I grieved the lost opportunity to know her personally, her posthumous gift had provided everything I needed to build the life she would have wanted for me. Amanda and I often reflected on how the car accident, as traumatic and painful as it had been, had ultimately led to discoveries and changes that improved my life immeasurably. Without the crisis that revealed my family's true priorities and the forced inactivity that allowed for investigation of Mrs. Hartwell's letter, I might have continued accepting inadequate treatment and limited expectations indefinitely. The accident had been the catalyst for truth-telling and boundary setting that had been necessary for years, but had seemed impossible while I was still hoping for family acceptance and approval that would never materialize. The final chapter of this transformation involved using Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance not just for personal security, but for creating positive impact in ways that would have made her proud. I established a scholarship fund for students from dysfunctional families who needed support for educational advancement, recognizing that financial independence was often crucial for escaping harmful family dynamics and building healthier lives. The scholarship criteria specifically included provisions for students who had overcome family obstacles and demonstrated resilience in pursuing their goals despite limited support systems. My career at Pacific Coast Marketing Agency flourished once I was no longer carrying the emotional burden of trying to earn family approval while managing constant disappointment and rejection. The confidence that came from knowing I was valued and supported, even if posthumously, allowed me to take creative risks and pursue leadership opportunities that had previously seemed too ambitious or risky. My supervisor noticed the change in my work quality and confidence level, leading to promotions and increased responsibilities that aligned with the career goals Mrs. Hartwell had expressed pride in through her letters. The relationship with David evolved into an engagement and marriage that was celebrated by our chosen family of friends and supportive colleagues, rather than complicated by dysfunctional family dynamics and competing priorities. His family embraced me completely, providing the experience of healthy family relationships and mutual support that I had never known was possible. Their immediate inclusion and genuine care offered daily examples of how family members should treat each other, reinforcing the patterns of behavior I was learning in therapy and witnessing in healthy relationships.
My commitment to maintaining boundaries with people who couldn't or wouldn't provide similar respect and consideration. Looking back on the journey from that terrifying night in the emergency room to building a life based on genuine love and mutual respect, I understood that the phone call to my family from the hospital had been a gift, despite their crushing response. Their immediate rejection had forced me to confront realities I had been avoiding and seek support from people who actually cared about my well-being. The discovery of Mrs. Hartwell's love and her inheritance had provided both the emotional validation and practical resources necessary to build the life I deserved, rather than settling for what I had been conditioned to accept as sufficient. The emergency room phone call that had initially seemed like the worst moment of my life had actually been the beginning of the best chapter, setting in motion discoveries and changes that led to genuine happiness and security. Sometimes the people who refuse to show up when you need them most are actually doing you a favor by revealing who they really are and forcing you to find better sources of love and support. Mrs. Hartwell's posthumous gift had been not just financial inheritance, but the knowledge that I was worthy of love, pride, and investment from someone who mattered, even if that person could only express it through letters I received too late to thank her personally. The transformation that followed my discovery of Margaret Hartwell's inheritance extended far beyond financial security into every aspect of my identity and future possibilities. The psychological impact of learning that someone had genuinely valued me and searched for me for decades created a fundamental shift in how I viewed myself and what I believed I deserved from relationships.
For the first time in my adult life, I had concrete evidence that I was worthy of love, investment, and pride from a family member, even if that validation came posthumously through legal documents and heartfelt letters I had never been allowed to receive. The investigation into Mrs. Hartwell's business empire revealed a woman of remarkable intelligence and determination who had built her fortune through strategic real estate investments throughout Southern California during the 1970s and 1980s. Her properties included commercial buildings in prime locations, apartment complexes in developing neighborhoods, and retail spaces that had appreciated dramatically over the decades. Beyond her business acumen, the research revealed her philanthropic activities, including substantial donations to educational institutions, women's business organizations, and scholarship funds for first-generation college students. Her values and priorities, evident through her charitable giving and business practices, aligned perfectly with the principles I had developed independently, suggesting that our connection went deeper than blood relation. Reading through Mrs. Hartwell's personal papers, which Patterson had preserved as part of the estate documentation, provided insights into her personality and character that made the loss of our relationship even more poignant. Her private journals, which she had designated for my inheritance, revealed a woman who valued education, independence, and integrity above social status or material accumulation. She had written extensively about her regrets regarding the estrangement from her daughter and her hopes for eventually meeting her granddaughter. Her descriptions of following my academic and career progress from a distance demonstrated genuine pride in my achievements and understanding of the challenges I had faced in building an independent life. The journals also revealed Mrs. Hartwell's growing concern about my family situation as she observed their dynamics through social media and public records. She had noticed the disparity in how my parents celebrated Michael's achievements compared to their minimal acknowledgement of my accomplishments. Her notes indicated that she had considered direct intervention on several occasions, but had hesitated due to legal advice about respecting family boundaries and avoiding harassment accusations. Her frustration with being unable to help or support me was evident throughout her writings, particularly during periods when she could see I was struggling financially or professionally, while my parents provided extensive support to Michael. One particularly moving entry from Mrs. Hartwell's journal, dated just 6 months before her death, expressed her decision to include me as the primary beneficiary in her will. Despite never having met me personally, she wrote about her certainty that I would use the inheritance wisely and her hope that the financial security would allow me to pursue my goals without compromising my values or accepting inadequate treatment from others. Her words demonstrated a level of understanding and faith in my character that my immediate family had never expressed, validating my sense of being fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued by the people who were supposed to know me best. The emotional healing that came from reading Mrs. Hartwell's words about me required extensive processing through therapy and long conversations with Amanda about reframing my self-perception and future expectations. Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist I began working with during my recovery, specialized in family trauma and helped me understand how growing up with systematic devaluation had shaped my beliefs about my worth and potential. The evidence of Mrs. Hartwell's love and pride provided a powerful counter-narrative to the messages I had internalized from years of feeling like a disappointment or burden to my immediate family. Dr. Chen helped me recognize that my parents' treatment of me had never been about my inadequacies or failures, but about their own psychological limitations and dysfunctional family dynamics. The revelation about Mrs. Hartwell's attempts to contact me proved that their behavior was rooted in selfishness and control rather than legitimate concerns about my welfare or family harmony. This understanding allowed me to separate my sense of self-worth from their opinions and reactions, creating space for developing healthier relationships and pursuing goals based on my own values rather than seeking their approval or avoiding their criticism. The practical aspects of managing Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance required learning about real estate investment, tax planning, and estate management from professionals who had worked with her during her lifetime. Her financial advisor, Margaret Torres, became an invaluable mentor in understanding the business principles that had guided Mrs. Hartwell's success and the philanthropic vision that had shaped her later investments. Torres had known Mrs. Hartwell personally for over 15 years and shared stories about her intelligence, humor,
and generous spirit that helped me feel connected to the grandmother I had never been allowed to meet. Torres explained that Mrs. Hartwell had been particularly interested in supporting women who were building independent careers and breaking free from limiting family or social expectations. Her investment choices often reflected these values, favoring businesses owned by women or companies that promoted workplace equality and advancement opportunities. Her philanthropic giving had focused on educational scholarships and programs that helped people overcome family dysfunction or economic disadvantage to pursue their goals. Understanding these priorities helped me make decisions about managing the inheritance in ways that would honor her memory and continue her positive impact. The decision to use part of the inheritance to establish the Margaret Hartwell Foundation required months of legal planning and consultation with experts in nonprofit management and charitable giving. The foundation's mission focused on providing educational scholarships and family counseling services for young adults from dysfunctional family backgrounds who needed support to build independent, healthy lives. The scholarship criteria specifically targeted students who had demonstrated resilience in overcoming family obstacles while maintaining strong academic performance and community involvement despite limited support systems. Working with attorneys and foundation specialists to establish the legal framework for the Margaret Hartwell Foundation provided a sense of purpose and connection to my grandmother's legacy that was deeply fulfilling. The process required learning about nonprofit governance, charitable tax regulations, and program evaluation methods that challenged me intellectually while advancing goals that aligned with both Mrs. Hartwell's values and my own experiences. The foundation became a way to transform the pain of our lost relationship into positive impact for others facing similar challenges with family dysfunction and limited support. The first recipients of Margaret Hartwell Foundation scholarships were selected through a rigorous application process that emphasized personal essays about overcoming family obstacles and building independent lives despite limited support. Reading through these applications was both heartbreaking and inspiring, revealing that my experiences with family dysfunction and emotional neglect were unfortunately common, but also demonstrating the remarkable resilience and determination of young people who refuse to let family limitations define their potential. The scholarship recipients reminded me of my younger self, working multiple jobs to pay for college while managing the emotional burden of family indifference and occasional active sabotage of my goals. The scholarship award ceremony, held at a hotel ballroom in downtown Los Angeles, became an emotional celebration of resilience and achievement that Mrs. Hartwell would have loved. The recipients shared their stories of overcoming family obstacles, and several mentioned how the financial support had allowed them to focus on their studies without working excessive hours or accepting financial dependence that came with strings attached and emotional manipulation. Their gratitude and determination reminded me why Mrs. Hartwell's gift had been so transformative in my own life and validated my decision to use her inheritance to help others in similar situations. My relationship with David continued to deepen throughout this period of personal transformation and foundation work. His support during my discovery of Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance and his understanding of my need to process decades of family dysfunction demonstrated the kind of partnership I had never imagined possible. Unlike the competitive dynamics I had experienced with my family, David celebrated my successes without feeling threatened and provided emotional support without expecting anything in return. His family's immediate acceptance of me and their genuine interest in my foundation work provided daily examples of healthy family functioning and mutual support. The engagement and wedding planning process became an opportunity to create the kind of celebration that reflected our values and included only people who genuinely supported our relationship. Rather than dealing with family drama, guest list politics, and competing expectations, we planned an intimate ceremony that focused on commitment and joy, rather than social obligation and family performance. Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance had provided the financial freedom to make choices based on what felt meaningful, rather than what seemed expected or affordable,
allowing us to create a wedding that truly represented our relationship and values. David's family embraced the foundation work with enthusiasm, volunteering for events and contributing their professional skills to help expand the program's reach and effectiveness. His mother, a retired teacher, became particularly involved in mentoring scholarship recipients and helping them navigate academic and career challenges. His father, an accountant, provided pro bono financial advice to young adults who were learning to manage money independently for the first time. Their involvement demonstrated the kind of family support and investment that I had always craved but never experienced, while also advancing the Foundation's mission in ways that honored Mrs. Hartwell's memory. The process of purchasing my own home using Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance represented a milestone in independence and security that felt both practical and symbolic. The house I chose was a charming craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood near downtown Riverside, with enough space for a home office where I could manage foundation business and enough privacy to create the peaceful environment I had always wanted. The purchase process was remarkably stress-free compared to previous major life decisions because I didn't need to consider family opinions, ask for financial assistance, or worry about meeting other people's expectations or approval. Decorating and furnishing my new home became an exercise in discovering my own tastes and preferences without influence from family criticism or suggestions. For the first time in my life, I could choose colors, furniture, and artwork based purely on what brought me joy, rather than what seemed safe or acceptable to others. The freedom to create a living space that reflected my personality and values was surprisingly emotional, representing the kind of self-expression and autonomy that had been discouraged or dismissed throughout my childhood and young adulthood. The home became a gathering place for the chosen family I had built through genuine friendships and professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals.
Values. Amanda was a frequent visitor, often staying for weekend planning sessions for foundation events or simply enjoying the peaceful environment I had created. David's family treated the house as an extension of their own family gathering spaces, hosting holiday celebrations and casual dinners that provided the kind of warm, inclusive family experiences I had always imagined but never experienced growing up. My career at Pacific Coast Marketing Agency continued to flourish, as the confidence and security from Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance allowed me to take creative risks and pursue leadership opportunities without fear of failure affecting my basic security. The agency's owner, recognizing my increased initiative and improved work quality, offered me a partnership opportunity that would have been financially impossible before the inheritance, but now represented an exciting professional challenge rather than an overwhelming financial burden. The partnership allowed me to develop marketing campaigns for nonprofit organizations and social justice causes that aligned with my values, while building a business that could provide sustainable income beyond Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance. The decision to limit contact with my parents and Michael to rare, structured interactions required ongoing boundary maintenance, but became easier as my new life filled with positive relationships and meaningful activities. Their occasional attempts to resume normal family contact were met with polite but firm reminders that their past behavior, particularly their deception about Mrs. Hartwell, had fundamentally changed our relationship dynamics. My financial independence eliminated their ability to use guilt about family support or obligations to manipulate my choices, while my therapeutic work had provided tools for recognizing and resisting their emotional manipulation tactics. Michael's reaction to learning about Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance and my resulting financial independence was predictably self-centered and resentful. His initial response focused on questioning whether I deserved the inheritance and suggesting that Mrs. Hartwell had been mentally incompetent when she made her will. When those arguments failed to gain traction, he shifted to claiming that our parents' decision to prevent contact with Mrs. Hartwell had been justified by family history I didn't understand. His inability to acknowledge the damage caused by decades of deception and his continued insistence that I was somehow responsible for family problems confirmed that they had not developed the insight or empathy necessary for rebuilding healthy family relationships.
My parents' response to the inheritance and my subsequent boundary setting was more complex, involving alternating attempts at reconciliation and expressions of resentment about my newfound independence. My mother occasionally sent cards or flowers for holidays or special occasions, apparently hoping to maintain some connection without addressing her role in hiding Mrs. Hartwell's existence or acknowledging the harm caused by years of emotional neglect. My father's approach was more direct, occasionally calling to discuss practical matters like family property or legal issues, but avoiding any conversation about emotions or relationship dynamics. The most revealing aspect of my parents' reaction to my transformation was their apparent inability to understand why their behavior during my medical crisis and their deception about Mrs. Hartwell had permanently damaged our relationship. They seemed to expect that time would allow me to forgive and forget without any acknowledgement of wrongdoing or commitment to changed behavior on their part. Their continued focus on maintaining their reputation and avoiding responsibility for their choices confirmed that they had not developed the insight or empathy necessary for rebuilding healthy family relationships. 1 year after establishing the Margaret Hartwell Foundation, the program had grown to include not only educational scholarships, but also counseling services for families attempting to heal from dysfunction and support groups for young adults navigating the challenges of building independent lives despite limited family support. The expansion required hiring professional staff and developing partnerships with educational institutions and mental health organizations throughout Southern California. The growth felt like a fitting tribute to Mrs. Hartwell's memory and a practical application of the lessons I had learned through my own journey from family dysfunction to healthy independence. The foundation's success attracted attention from other philanthropic organizations and media outlets interested in innovative approaches to supporting young adults from challenging family backgrounds. Speaking at conferences and contributing to articles about family dysfunction and recovery became unexpected opportunities to share my story and advocate for others facing similar challenges. The public speaking engagements were initially intimidating, but became easier as I realized that sharing my experiences could help other people recognize dysfunctional family patterns and seek the support necessary for building healthier lives. The relationship I had built with Mrs. Hartwell through her letters and journals continued to provide guidance and inspiration for foundation decisions and personal choices. Her writings revealed a woman who had faced significant challenges and setbacks throughout her life, but had maintained optimism and determination while building both financial success and meaningful relationships. Her example demonstrated that it was possible to overcome family dysfunction and create a fulfilling life based on personal values, rather than family expectations or social pressure. 2 years after the car accident that initially revealed my family's true priorities, I was living a life that exceeded anything I imagined possible during my years of trying to earn family acceptance and approval. The physical scars from the accident had faded to barely visible reminders, while the emotional healing had progressed to the point where I could discuss my family background without feeling defensive or ashamed. The security provided by Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance had created space for personal growth, meaningful work, and healthy relationships that would have been impossible while struggling for basic financial stability and family acceptance. The marriage to David represented not just personal happiness, but the creation of a new family unit based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values, rather than obligation and competition. His relationship provided daily examples of healthy communication, conflict resolution, and mutual support that contrasted sharply with the dysfunctional patterns I had grown up accepting as normal. His family's inclusion of me in their traditions and celebrations offered ongoing education in healthy family dynamics.
Foundation work provided opportunities to help others escape similar dysfunction.
Looking back on the journey from that terrifying emergency room phone call to building a life centered on meaningful work and genuine relationships, I understood that my family's rejection had been a painful gift that forced me to seek better sources of love and support. Mrs. Hartwell's posthumous revelation of her decades-long love and search for connection had provided both the emotional validation and practical resources necessary for building the life she would have wanted for me. The foundation work ensured that her legacy would continue helping others long after both of us were gone, transforming personal pain into positive impact for future generations. The emergency room call that had seemed like the end of family relationships had actually been the beginning of discovering what family could and should mean when based on genuine care rather than biological obligation. The people who had refused to show up during my medical crisis had revealed their true priorities, while the people who had appeared in my life since then had demonstrated the kind of love and support that made life meaningful and secure. Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance had been more than financial assistance. It had been proof that I was worthy of love, investment, and pride from someone who mattered, even if that validation came through letters and legal documents rather than personal relationship. The Foundation's third annual scholarship ceremony was scheduled for the anniversary of Mrs. Hartwell's death, creating a celebration of her life and legacy that honored both her memory and the ongoing impact of her generosity. The event would bring together scholarship recipients, foundation staff, and community supporters to recognize achievements and plan for continued growth in serving young adults from dysfunctional family backgrounds. The ceremony represented the transformation of personal trauma into community healing, exactly the kind of positive impact that Mrs. Hartwell had hoped her inheritance would create. The ripple effects of Mrs. Hartwell's legacy extended far beyond my personal transformation into a network of healing and empowerment that touched hundreds of lives across Southern California. 5 years after discovering her inheritance, the Margaret Hartwell Foundation had become a recognized leader in supporting young adults recovering from family trauma, with programs that addressed not only educational needs, but also therapeutic support, career mentorship, and community building for survivors of dysfunctional family systems. The Foundation's comprehensive approach had attracted partnerships with major universities, healthcare systems, and corporate sponsors who understood the critical importance of helping talented individuals overcome family obstacles to reach their full potential. The scholarship program had evolved into something Mrs. Hartwell never could have imagined when she first wrote those heartfelt letters I had been prevented from receiving. Beyond traditional educational funding, the Foundation now offered therapeutic retreats where scholarship recipients could process family trauma in a supportive environment with professional counselors and peer support groups. These intensive weekend programs, held at a retreat center in the San Bernardino Mountains that the Foundation had purchased and renovated, provided safe spaces for young adults to share their experiences, develop healthy coping strategies, and build lasting friendships with others who understood their unique challenges. The retreat center itself had become a symbol of transformation and hope, featuring comfortable accommodations, therapeutic gardens, and meeting spaces designed to promote healing and connection. The property included a memorial garden dedicated to Mrs. Hartwell's memory, where participants could reflect on their journey and honor the woman whose generosity had made their healing possible. The garden featured bronze plaques with excerpts from Mrs. Hartwell's letters and journals, sharing her wisdom about resilience, independence, and the importance of building chosen families based on mutual respect and genuine care. One of the most successful innovations had been the mentorship program that paired scholarship recipients with successful professionals who had overcome similar family challenges in their own lives. These mentors provided not only career guidance, but also emotional support and practical advice about maintaining boundaries with dysfunctional family members while building healthy relationships and achieving professional goals. The mentorship relationships often developed into lifelong friendships that extended far beyond the formal program structure, creating a network of support that helped participants navigate adult challenges with confidence and wisdom. Dr. Sarah Chen, my therapist who had helped me process my own family trauma, had become the Foundation's clinical director, overseeing the therapeutic components of all programs and training staff in trauma-informed approaches to supporting young adults from dysfunctional backgrounds.
Her expertise in family systems therapy and her personal understanding of my journey made her the perfect leader for developing innovative treatment approaches that address the unique challenges faced by scholarship recipients. Under her guidance, the Foundation had developed specialized programs for different types of family dysfunction, including narcissistic abuse, addiction-related trauma, and systematic favoritism that left some children feeling unwanted and unvalued. The research component of the Foundation's work had attracted attention from academic institutions and mental health organizations interested in understanding the long-term effects of family dysfunction and the most effective interventions for promoting healing and resilience. Dr. Chen had partnered with researchers at several universities to conduct longitudinal studies tracking the progress of scholarship recipients over time, documenting their educational achievements, career success, relationship quality, and overall mental health outcomes. The preliminary results had been encouraging, showing that comprehensive support combining financial assistance, therapy, and mentorship produced significantly better outcomes than traditional scholarship programs alone. My role as Foundation president had evolved from personal passion project to full-time career that utilized skills I never knew I possessed. The public speaking engagements had become more frequent and influential, with invitations to address conferences, university audiences, and corporate leadership teams about the hidden costs of family dysfunction and the business case for supporting employees who might be struggling with challenging family situations.
These speaking opportunities had led to consulting contracts with major corporations interested in developing employee assistance programs that addressed family trauma and its impact on workplace performance and satisfaction. The corporate partnerships had been particularly rewarding because they addressed family dysfunction from a prevention and early intervention perspective rather than waiting for crisis situations. Working with human resources departments to develop training programs for managers who might notice signs of family trauma in their employees had created opportunities to provide support before situations reached crisis levels. The workplace education programs included information about recognizing signs of family dysfunction, resources for employees seeking help, and policies that supported workers who needed flexibility to address family-related therapeutic or legal needs. David's involvement in the Foundation had deepened over the years, with his graphic design skills contributing to marketing materials, website development, and visual branding that helped the organization reach broader audiences and attract additional funding. His family had also become major supporters, with his parents serving on the Foundation's board of directors and his siblings volunteering for events and programs. Their involvement had provided me with ongoing examples of healthy family dynamics while also advancing the Foundation's mission in practical and meaningful ways. Our marriage had strengthened throughout this period of professional growth and Foundation development, with shared values and complementary skills creating a partnership that felt both personally fulfilling and professionally productive. David's unwavering support for my Foundation work and his genuine pride in my achievements stood in stark contrast to the competition and resentment I had experienced from my biological family. His celebration of my successes without feeling threatened and his willingness to subordinate his own preferences to support Foundation goals demonstrated the kind of healthy relationship dynamics that I had learned were possible through Mrs. Hartwell's example and therapeutic work. The decision to start our own family had been carefully considered in light of my experiences with dysfunctional family dynamics and my commitment to breaking generational patterns of emotional neglect and favoritism. Dr. Chen had provided extensive counseling about parenting approaches that would promote healthy child development while avoiding the mistakes that had characterized my own upbringing. The Foundation's research on family dysfunction had also informed my understanding of protective factors that could help children develop resilience and emotional intelligence even when dealing with challenging extended family relationships. The birth of our daughter, Margaret Rose, named in honor of both Mrs. Hartwell and David's grandmother, represented the creation of a new generation that would be raised with unconditional love, consistent support, and healthy boundaries, rather than the conditional acceptance and competitive dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Holding her for the first time in the hospital where I had once been abandoned during my medical crisis felt like a powerful symbol of healing and transformation, demonstrating how far my life had traveled from those dark moments of family rejection to this celebration of new life and unlimited possibilities. Raising Margaret Rose with intention and awareness had required ongoing education about child development,
healthy parenting practices, and strategies for building secure attachment relationships. The Foundation's therapeutic resources had provided access to parenting experts and child development specialists who helped me understand how to create the kind of family environment that Mrs. Hartwell would have wanted for me. David's family had also provided wonderful examples of healthy grandparent relationships, showing Margaret Rose daily examples of intergenerational love and support that didn't involve manipulation, favoritism, or conditional acceptance. My parents' reaction to Margaret Rose's birth had been predictably self-centered, focusing more on their status as grandparents and their desire for social media photos than on genuine interest in their granddaughter's well-being or our family's needs. Their attempts to establish traditional grandparent relationships without acknowledging their past behavior or committing to healthier dynamics had been politely but firmly declined. The boundaries I had established included supervised visits only, no overnight stays, and clear expectations about respectful behavior that prioritized Margaret Rose's emotional safety over their convenience or preferences. Michael's response to becoming an uncle had been typically dismissive, with minimal interest in meeting Margaret Rose and several inappropriate comments about the responsibilities and financial burden of parenthood. His continued inability to recognize his role in family dysfunction or express genuine care for others' well-being had confirmed that maintaining distance was necessary for protecting my daughter from the kind of emotional damage I had experienced growing up. The contrast between his indifference and David's family's enthusiasm about their new granddaughter could not have been more stark or validating of my choices about family boundaries. The Foundation's impact had attracted national attention when a documentary filmmaker approached me about creating a film exploring the hidden epidemic of family dysfunction and the innovative approaches being developed to support survivors. The documentary project, titled Chosen Family, followed several scholarship recipients through their healing journeys while also examining the broader societal costs of family trauma and the potential benefits of comprehensive support programs. My participation in the film required sharing details about my own family history and the discovery of Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance, but the opportunity to reach broader audiences with the Foundation's message justified the personal exposure and vulnerability involved. The documentary's premiere at several film festivals had generated significant media coverage and Foundation donations, but more importantly, it had sparked conversations about family dysfunction that helped reduce stigma and encourage people to seek help for their own situations. The film's impact had been particularly meaningful for scholarship recipients who saw their experiences validated and honored through professional storytelling that emphasized resilience and hope rather than victimization and despair. Many viewers had contacted the Foundation after seeing the film, seeking resources for their own healing journeys or wanting to support the organization's work through donations or volunteer service.
Foundation programs to include family reconciliation services had been one of the most challenging but ultimately rewarding developments in recent years. Working with families who wanted to heal dysfunctional patterns required careful assessment to distinguish between situations where reconciliation was possible and healthy versus cases where continued contact would be harmful to survivors. Dr. Chen had developed screening criteria and therapeutic protocols that prioritized survivor safety, while also offering hope for families genuinely committed to change and accountability. The Family Reconciliation Program had achieved some remarkable success stories where parents or siblings had genuinely acknowledged their harmful behavior, committed to therapeutic work, and gradually rebuilt relationships based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. However, the program had also confirmed that many family systems were too entrenched in dysfunction to change, validating the choices made by survivors who had decided that maintaining distance was necessary for their well-being. The balanced approach had helped reduce guilt and confusion for people struggling with decisions about family contact, while providing support for whatever choices best serve their emotional health and safety. The research findings from the Foundation's longitudinal studies had been published in several academic journals and had influenced policy discussions about family support services and educational interventions. The data clearly demonstrated that comprehensive support programs, combining financial assistance,
therapy, and mentorship produced better long-term outcomes than traditional approaches that addressed only educational or economic needs. The research had also revealed the significant economic costs of family dysfunction, including reduced educational achievement, increased mental health treatment needs, and decreased workplace productivity among adults who had experienced childhood emotional neglect or abuse. These research findings had supported successful advocacy efforts for increased funding for family support services and therapeutic programs targeting young adults aging out of foster care or leaving dysfunctional family situations. The foundation had testified before state legislative committees and contributed to policy recommendations that emphasize prevention and early intervention rather than crisis response alone. The advocacy work had created opportunities to influence systemic changes that would benefit far more people than the foundation could serve directly through its own programs. The 10th anniversary celebration of the Margaret Hartwell Foundation had been held at the same hotel ballroom where the first scholarship ceremony had taken place, but the event had grown from a small gathering of initial recipients to a major fundraising gala attended by hundreds of supporters, including corporate sponsors, political leaders, and celebrities who had become advocates for the foundation's mission. The evening had featured presentations from scholarship recipients who had gone on to achieve remarkable success in their chosen fields, testimonials from families who had benefited from reconciliation services, and recognition of the volunteers and staff members who had made the foundation's growth possible. The keynote speaker for the anniversary celebration had been Dr. Maya Patel, a scholarship recipient from the foundation's second year who had completed medical school and was now working as a psychiatrist specializing in family trauma. Her presentation about how the foundation's support had enabled her to overcome family dysfunction and pursue her dream of helping others heal had moved the audience to tears and resulted in the largest single-night fundraising total in the foundation's history. Her success story embodied everything that Mrs. Hartwell had hoped her inheritance would accomplish, demonstrating how supporting one person's healing journey could create ripple effects that benefited countless others. The anniversary celebration had also featured the dedication of a new endowment fund that would ensure the foundation's long-term sustainability and growth beyond my active involvement. Major donors had contributed to create a permanent funding source that would support core programs while also allowing for expansion into new areas of need. The endowment represented the transformation of Mrs. Hartwell's individual generosity into a permanent institution that would continue helping people recover from family dysfunction for generations to come. The personal journey from that terrifying emergency room phone call to building a foundation that had helped hundreds of people heal from family trauma represented the kind of transformation that Mrs. Hartwell had envisioned when she wrote those letters expressing her love and hopes for my future. The woman who had searched for me for decades and never given up hope that we might someday connect had provided not just financial inheritance, but the emotional foundation for building a life dedicated to helping others overcome similar challenges. Her legacy lived on not only through the foundation that bore her name, but through every person who had found healing, hope, and healthy relationships despite difficult family backgrounds. The ripple effects continued to expand as scholarship recipients graduated from the programs and began their own careers, many choosing professions that allowed them to help others in similar situations. Teachers, social workers, therapists, doctors, lawyers, and business leaders who had benefited from foundation support were now contributing their own skills and resources to help the next generation of survivors. The network of healing had become self-perpetuating, creating a community of resilience and mutual support that would continue growing long after my active involvement ended. Margaret Rose was growing up surrounded by this community of healing and empowerment, with dozens of honorary aunts and uncles who demonstrated healthy adult relationships and provided examples of people who had overcome significant challenges to build fulfilling lives. Her childhood was filled with foundation events, retreat center visits, and interactions with scholarship recipients who showed her daily examples of resilience, determination, and hope. The contrast between her experience of unconditional love and community support and my own childhood of emotional neglect and systematic devaluation represented the successful breaking of generational patterns that had been one of my primary goals. The Foundation's work had also influenced my understanding of forgiveness and healing in ways that had surprised me over the years. While I had never resumed close relationships with my parents or Michael, the therapeutic work and spiritual growth that had accompanied
The Foundation's development had allowed me to release much of the anger and resentment that had initially motivated my boundary setting. The understanding that their behavior had been rooted in their own dysfunction and limitations rather than my inadequacies had created space for compassion without requiring reconciliation or ongoing relationship. This evolution in my perspective had been particularly important for Margaret Rose's development, as it allowed me to discuss her biological grandparents and uncle with honesty, but without bitterness or hatred. She knew that these family members had made choices that were harmful and that maintaining distance was necessary for our family's well-being. But she also understood that people's behavior was often influenced by their own pain and limitations rather than malicious intent. This balanced perspective had helped her develop empathy and wisdom while also understanding the importance of protecting herself from relationships that might be harmful to her emotional health. Looking forward to the Foundation's future and my own continued healing journey, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had led from family rejection to community building and from personal trauma to helping others heal. Mrs. Hartwell's inheritance had provided far more than financial security. It had offered proof that I was worthy of love and investment, validation for my experiences of family dysfunction, and resources for building the kind of life that honored both her memory and my own values. The emergency room phone call that had initially seemed like the worst moment of my life had actually been the catalyst for discovering my true worth and potential for positive impact. The Foundation's mission statement, displayed prominently in every program location, captured the essence of what Mrs. Hartwell's legacy had made possible: transforming family trauma into community healing, one story at a time. Every scholarship recipient, every family that found reconciliation, every person who discovered their worth despite family rejection represented the ongoing fulfillment of her dreams for my future and her hopes that her love would continue creating positive change long after her death. The work would continue, the healing would expand, and her legacy of love would keep growing through every life touched by the Foundation that bore her name. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.